Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to review and give my thoughts on Path of Exile 2's early access after playing for around 360 hours across 5 different characters in both softcore trade and softcore solo self-found, begrudgingly trying to play characters that were not in the meta. I played a Lightning Rod Deadeye, a weapon swap freeze ignite Stormweaver that flopped hard, then in solo self-found an explosive grenade Witch Hunter, an essence drain contagion demon form Infernalist, and a poison gas arrow Pathfinder. If you would rather read the 10-page script I wrote for this review rather than listening to me read it to you, the link to it is in the video description. I will go into some things in more detail as I go, but let's get into it. The campaign was very fun aside from some zones being obnoxiously large. Bosses were challenging but fair, and relatively learnable for a PoE veteran at least. The dodge roll is fun to use. The disconnect protection is by far the greatest technical achievement made in the game, and an identification NPC has been long overdue. Being able to purchase back an item you accidentally sold to a vendor is a nice change, but at the cost of having vendor recipes for selling a group of certain items to a vendor. Some of this is retained with the reforging and salvage benches, but after a while, salvaging items for quality and socket currency becomes a bit tedious. The slower pacing of character progression is very akin to Ruthless in PoE 1, which makes for more meaningful upgrades as you progress, rather than, say, beating the campaign with rare gear from Act 2. I have leveled 9 characters in Ruthless in PoE 1. The game looks better than I thought GGG was capable of. The music is top-notch as always. I really enjoyed the amount of character-specific dialogue, though the audio balancing is all over the place. The introduction of gold is understandable, but took away one of the things that really made PoE 1 unique, along with the removal of utility flasks giving charms in their place. I was expecting to unlock the second and third charm slots by the end of the campaign, but this ended up being a very rare belt mod that I still rarely see after the mod weighting was buffed. Being able to swap gear without disrupting gems and their links was nice, but it does not feel like rune sockets are a suitable replacement for a crafting bench. I prefer gems leveling by playing the game rather than through tiers of uncut gems, and support gems not leveling or having quality bonuses makes the whole gem situation pretty much set it and forget it, rather than being something you're constantly tweaking and working on as in PoE 1. You also must make your way into Act 2 Cruel before you can get access to Tier 3 support gems and the last row of skills, which is way too late in the game to be able to start playing the build you are wanting to if you need access to those gems. Weapon-based gems all have specific weapon requirements rather than being able to use some crossbow skills with a regular bow or vice versa, or using certain mace or quarterstaff skills interchangeably. In PoE 1, most melee skills can be used with a variety of different weapon classes in relation to what the skill is. For example, it would make sense to be able to use Leap Slam with a quarterstaff, but not Bone Shatter. The inability to use multiple of the same support gems in a lot of ways provides the illusion of choice in how different skills can work together, with everything I played feeling like it was on rails rather than the choices I made feeling like I was creating something unique. I would say that being able to build almost every skill in PoE 1 in a wide variety of different ways is one of the game's biggest strengths. PoE 2 does not provide anywhere near the creativity. The passive tree doubles down on this, as there are no meaningful decisions to be made on many builds without life or resistances on the tree. You get the damage scaling for the skills you are using, take the defensive options around that, then chase after gear to match what you had access to. You don't get to make the choice to get resistances or life in lieu of more damage while you are leveling and improving gear to cover those areas, allowing you to change it later. The attribute requirements for high-level gems and weapon bases takes an absurd amount of investment to be able to use, so the idea that if you want to get more life to spec into strength does not work, as you need those attributes to use the skills you want to play with. The spirit system is something I like a lot, as it allows more to be done with mana, but then the way skills level at the higher levels makes them cost so much mana that it is unreasonable, and not all parts of the passive tree have access to any kind of mana recovery. The crafting system is not a pleasant experience at all, if you can even call transmute, augment, regal, exalt crafting. Lack of alteration orbs or scouring orbs that exist in PoE 1 make crafting a gamble from the moment you do anything to an item. But again, due to the lack of life and resistances on the passive tree, you must have these mods on your gear, really restricting doing other creative things with the item mods, such as trying to maximize life regen to make a demon form Infernalist build makes capping resistances in SSF nearly impossible. The same goes for weapons. There are mods that are a must-have to make an optimal build. Any weapon without physical damage is just less effective than any other options. Caster weapons have more variability when it comes to item mods, but then quality does nothing aside from on scepters, and they also cannot have rune sockets. I don't want to go too much into skill balance, as I expect that many changes are very likely in this regard moving forward, but Ignite is unconsciously awful. There's no way to guarantee an Ignite on an enemy, even with absurd investment, and even then, the damage it puts out is so bad compared to playing literally anything else. I enjoyed both the Trial of the Sekimas and the Trial of Chaos as Ascension avenues, but beyond that, I found running them pretty boring to chase the specific items that can only be obtained in the trials: Time Lost Jewels and Soul Cores. The Trial of Chaos is without a doubt harder than the Trial of Sekimas, as the damage of the bird bosses seems a bit overtuned, especially when considering all of the mods added to the fights. I actually never fought the Trial Master. All of my ascensions were through Zarok, a boss that has more base life than the first difficulty of the pinnacle bosses, and a one-shot mechanic that has no regard for the boons and honor you have. I do not think a guaranteed one-shot belongs on this boss. On the topic of bosses that one-shot you, let's jump into talking about Endgame. From my understanding, the Endgame system was relatively recently added to PoE 2. I hope that means there's a lot of space for it to change and grow, because I do not like the Endgame. The Endgame system is almost exactly like that of Last Epoch, where you push through a web of different map tile sets, building up to a boss fight. I was bored by this in Last Epoch, and I am also bored by this in Path of Exile 2. PoE 2 has more going on here though, with the towers that allow you to add a variety of different content to maps, and the Atlas is infinite rather than resetting on a boss kill. There is also no real goal, aside from climbing Waystone tiers and searching for citadels to attempt a boss that forces you to either one-shot it or perfectly dodge an onslaught of one-shot mechanics with no room for error. Dark Souls and Elden Ring are known for their challenging boss fights, and they, for the most part, do not beat you with endless one-shot mechanics. They beat you by causing you to run out of flask charges or punish you for being too greedy. Then you learn how to execute the fight better and can eventually win, and it feels rewarding to do so. I was hoping the in-game bosses would be more along the line of this, similar to how the first playthrough of the campaign was. The PoE 1 in-game gives you the Atlas with a goal to complete each of the different map tile sets under certain conditions. Completing each different map gives you an Atlas passive point, where you can spec into any content you want that is available. And each league reset, the tiers of the map tile sets are shuffled across the Atlas, so progression is a bit different each reset. Once all maps are completed, you can target certain maps you wish to farm, be it for the layout or specific drops that only come from those maps. Completing all of the maps on the Atlas in PoE 1 is a very satisfying experience that does not exist in PoE 2 at all. PoE 2 in-game does not itemize the tile sets, but rather gives you a waystone to enter the next map in the web. This means that you have no agency over which maps you want to farm, therefore often forcing you into maps with really large or tedious tile sets that you don't want to run over and over again. I really hope GGG finds a way to itemize the map tile sets, even if it requires burning the current in-game system completely to the ground. As divination cards start to find their way into the game, there will be restrictions to where the cards can drop, making this issue much more of a factor beyond the wanting to run maps you enjoy factor. The next biggest issues I have are losing all portals on death and mechanic passive trees being gated behind progressively difficult bosses that are the end goal of said content. I put out an entire video addressing these two topics specifically, but essentially this turns the relaxing mapping experience from PoE 1 into this tense experience where a single mistake is punished, greatly losing experience, remaining drops in the maps, and any extra content that was on that map, thus forcing players into playing more meta builds rather than being creative with their own build creations due to the state of defenses, skill balance, and desire to improve the content in the maps that is gated behind the bosses at the end. In PoE 1, there are way more viable builds that are good map clearers than there are builds that are good at killing in-game bosses. These builds are fun to play and are able to engage with the fully juiced versions of League mechanics in order to further optimize the builds so that eventually they might be able to attempt the in-game bosses. For example, in PoE 1, once I have completed enough of the Atlas, I can farm fully juiced Delirium or Breach and acquire Simulacrum or Breach Splinters in the lowest tier of maps with a build that may not be capable of running the Simulacrum or Breach Stones. With that said, let's segue into the different types of content available in maps. 3 minor mechanics, shrines, strongboxes, and essences, and 4 major mechanics, Breach, Ritual, Expedition, and Delirium. Shrines are pretty simple. Monsters surround the shrine with a buff granted to them by the shrine that you can take for yourself to take that buff. Some of them, though, are not actually buffs and can corrupt dropped items or turn dropped items into an extremely disappointing amount of gold. Some shrine buff icons resemble those from PoE 1, but with different effects, which is very confusing, such as the Gloom Shrine icon in PoE 2 is the Skeletal Shrine icon from PoE 1, while a Gloom Shrine also happens to exist in PoE 1. Strongboxes were initially the worst mechanic in the endgame, but were changed to not have a 10-second delay before spawning monsters. They can still spawn monsters so far away from the strongbox that you may not know they even came from the box, and the rewards in general are pretty lackluster. In PoE 1, strongboxes pretty much burst with monsters on top of the box when you click it, and can be very deadly as well as rewarding. In PoE 2, I still find it to be a waste of my time to interact with strongboxes at all. Essences have a variety of forms and buff monsters encased in them with different abilities depending on the types of essences it contains, exactly how it works in PoE 1. However, the functionality of essences is a bit different in PoE 2. They are essentially targeted transmutation orbs that guarantee a mod of a certain type, such as life, fire, speed, etc. There are also greater essences that work as a regal orb in the same way, but they are so rare that finding one of the type you want to use yourself is nearly impossible. Even then, using essences is nearly as much of a gamble as using the normal currency orbs. Sometimes essences will also grant mods that are not in the category they state that they will add. When you walk over a breach hand in PoE 2, you are swarmed by a horde of enemies so far distant from the slower pace of the campaign that it feels like you are playing PoE 1. Mapping in general pretty much feels this way, but breaches are on another level. As a PoE 1 enjoyer, I personally quite like the challenge posed by the breaches until something in it one-shots you, causing to lose your entire map. So, rather than laughing off the craziness, I would find myself upset and mad. Catalysts come from breaches in PoE 2 and can increase the value of mods on rings and amulets, but not belts as they can in PoE 1. You can also acquire breach rings that can increase the quality of mods, with catalysts from the normal 20% to 50%, in most cases making these the best ring bases in the game. I found this very cool and a good reason to farm breaches outside of farming splinters for the Breachstone boss. The splinter drop rate is acceptable enough that you can farm breachstones without too much hassle. The boss, though, has a clear speed check before you can fight it and is full of powerful abilities that can one-shot you. You need a very optimized and powerful build to take down this boss in order to increase the rewards of future breaches. If you die even once or fail to clear fast enough to reach the boss, you must farm another 300 breach splinters to try again. Enjoy farming for 3 to 4 more hours in your breaches without the buffs that come from behind the boss. This is the best of the 4 major pieces of extra content in maps. Rituals are absurd. You get trapped in a small circle that spawns a bunch of monsters that swarm you, making it unable to move if you can't kill them fast enough, while spawning chaos pods on the ground that you can't see under the enemies or your own skills, balls of chaos that will chase you, requiring you to move through them to detonate them, provided you are not completely surrounded by the enemies, causing them to explode on you, a tornado of rats that constantly moves towards you, dealing a physical damage over time that is nearly impossible to mitigate, forcing you to constantly move around through the horde of enemies, or waves of blood that will push you around. In other words, Ritual is some bullshit. Ritual rewards you with a selection of garbage items you can purchase with the favor you gain by killing monsters in the circle, and does not give you the option to filter the items based on your loot filter as you can in PoE 1. The favor cost given to items does not have any relation to the rarity of the items, so a magic item could cost more than a rare item, something that PoE 1 also does. Occasionally, about 25% of the time in my experience, an omen may be offered as a reward that can guarantee a specific outcome of using a currency orb, but I have never seen one that provides anything of significant value. Expeditions are very similar to PoE 1, where you place bombs that raise monsters flagged in the detonation areas with remnants that can give more rewards in exchange for a buff to the enemies. The currency rewarded to you has been simplified for each of the expedition members, with Gwynin allowing you to attempt to craft weapons, Rog to craft armor, Tujin to craft jewelry, and Danig to convert currency to the types used by the other Kalgurans. The crafting mechanic is similar to the Rog crafting mechanic in PoE 1, but not nearly as powerful. It is difficult to find a base item you might want to attempt to craft, and most likely it will not turn into anything useful, ultimately wasting your time. You can sometimes get logbooks that take you to a larger expedition encounter that are mostly only good for acquiring more of the expedition crafting currency, as any other rewards are lackluster. It is also much more difficult to get the expedition tablets due to the much lower number of monsters in each encounter, compared to the other content, making targeting expeditions pretty difficult as well. To get buffs for expedition, you have to find a logbook of a certain map tier of the right type that also happens to spawn the boss. I have never seen this boss, as I have only dropped 3 logbooks in my 360 hours of play. Delirium is a nightmare, but with a very valuable reward in distilled emotions. These are used to anoint notable passive skills onto an amulet, provided that it is not corrupted. This is a huge potential source of power for almost every build if you can get the right emotions. Farming Delirium is not fun, as it fills map with this thick fog that forces you to play the game in grayscale, making it impossible to see the edges of the zone that are not pathable, and hiding many monster abilities, including their on-death effect ground degens. The end goal of farming Delirium is the Simulacrum, which requires 300 splinters to access. The last day I played PoE 2, I spent 6 hours farming Delirium to acquire 180 Simulacrum splinters in maps that I applied distilled emotions to. This forces the entire map to be covered in fog for the entire map, rather than only during the duration of the mirror. In maps with the Delirium mirror, you can only reasonably expect to reach 3 stacks of rewards, which gives 3 distilled emotions and most often 1 Simulacrum splinter. In the Delirious maps, more Simulacrum splinters can drop, sometimes only 3, and if the bosses spawn, possibly around 12, if you are lucky. Being generous, say you get 6 splinters in each map, it would take 50 maps covered in fog with the same music playing to get a single Simulacrum, which you must beat to get Delirium passives. I attempted this twice. The first one crashed, the second one spawned every magic monster with a fire trail that blew up my gas clouds I was using to deal damage. That was the final straw for me, causing me to walk away from PoE 2 until the next big update. There are a couple more things to mention, but the big feeling I am left with is that the PoE 2 endgame has no respect for my time investment as a player, nor is it encouraging to try to create unique and off-meta builds, which I believe to be the biggest strength of PoE 1. Playing in a trade league, it is much more possible to get something strong put together, but playing in SSF, you have to get insanely lucky or you will suffer. The items you need to roll with resistances on them and there's no way around it. The most reasonable way to acquire useful gear in SSF is to loot all of the rare items, vendor them for gold, then use the gamble vendor to fish for items. I want to kill monsters, get loot, and find upgrades for my build from those monsters. Instead, the best gear I was able to get in SSF was from playing a slot machine, and I hate it. But when it comes to weapons, you can't get the top tier bases from the gamble vendor. On my first build in SSF, I wanted to craft an expert bombard crossbow for my grenade witch hunter, but that base only drops at level 79 or higher, which is T15 maps. It felt like a waste of time to invest my currency on the lower tier bombard crossbow, because if I was going to get lucky and hit something big, I wanted it to be on the better base. I finally did manage to craft a decent bow for my gas arrow pathfinder after farming hundreds of maps, picking up every single expert zealot bow and expert dual string bow I found. I tried to craft something on them, throwing anything bad into the reforging bench for more attempts and using every physical essence I found. That bow does not reach 400 physical DPS. I could purchase a better bow in Trade League for under 50 exalts. That character reached level 93, and also does not have a gem with all 5 sockets. Even the greater Jeweler's Orbs are so incredibly rare, not to mention the perfect Jeweler's Orbs. I can't grind XP to get myself to level 20 gems. The only way to get these is to drop them from a level 82 zone, which is a corrupted T16 Waystone run in an irradiated map with corruption. There is only so much grinding bad map tile sets I don't want to run without any tangible upgrades to my character I can tolerate, especially when the endgame requires so much focus to not make any mistakes in getting my character killed by some dumb rare monster mods, taking one step in the wrong direction, or mistiming a dodge roll. I really want Path of Exile 2 in-game to be as great of an experience as Path of Exile 1 has been for me for so many years. Though in its current state, it is so far from an enjoyable experience to me, it is hard to look at it and see hope, honestly. I tried really hard to give it a fair shot, and now my biggest fear is that since GGG is now fully owned by Tencent, upon the successful launch of PoE 2 Early Access, they may force GGG to abandon PoE 1 and focus all resources towards PoE 2 going forward. This fear grows with each passing day. We do not get news about the next PoE 1 league, and that fits in line with the comment Jonathan made during the 0.1.1 podcast about 3.26 and how it was quite a topic to get into. Hopefully I am wrong and we will get information soon, but that is all I have for my Path of Exile 2 Early Access review. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, definitely hit the like button as it really helps the channel out a lot. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss more videos from me. If you'd like to help support my channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon just below the video, or by joining to become a member, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.